the Gospel reading. The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 8th chapter. Then Jesus and his disciples arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. As he stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg of you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now there on the hillside a large herd of swine was feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter those. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down toward the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the swineherds saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened, and when they came to see Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
And please be seated. Well, it is officially summertime, folks. And I'm hoping that somewhere on your summer calendars this year, there's time for at least a little relaxation and some time in the sun. And maybe for many of you, that'll include some time on a boat. Maybe you like a speedboat flying across the waves with a skier or a tube in tow. Or maybe you're looking forward to taking a peaceful ride in a kayak or on a canoe, exploring the shorelines. Or maybe your favorite boat is a fishing boat, and you have dreams of a tasty walleye dinner. Or maybe you're like me, and you appreciate just cruising leisurely in a pontoon boat, enjoying the scenery and the company of the people traveling with you. In this morning's gospel reading, Jesus and his disciples head out on a boat ride. But whatever their intention is as they're leaving, this turns out to be no leisure cruise. It seems that every adventure with Jesus becomes an occasion for him to show us something more about God's glory and power, and this trip does not disappoint. Jesus and his disciples, as I said, are heading out across the Sea of Galilee, and as they get going, Jesus takes a no doubt well-deserved nap in the boat. But a windstorm blows up and it nearly swamps their vessel. Now, certain that they're about to be swallowed up by the sea, the disciples wake Jesus up and frantically call out to him. And Jesus, once awake, simply quiets the wind and the waves. And it leaves his disciples amazed and wondering, who can this be that even the wind and the waves obey him? Now, after all of that, no doubt they're probably glad to finally be on shore again. But no sooner do they set foot on land when they're confronted by another wild force beyond their control. And this time it's a man who is possessed by demons. He is naked and he's so overcome by violent impulses that he can't be restrained even by chains and leg shackles. He's not with his community. He's living outside of the city among the tombs. But when he sees Jesus, he recognizes him and he demands to know what there is between them. What does Jesus, the Son of the Most High God, have to do with him? Is this the man talking or the demons? We don't know, and maybe even the man himself doesn't really know any longer where his identity ends and the possession begins. What is clear, though, is that Jesus will not allow the unclean spirit to keep on tormenting this man. He intends to unbind him and set him free. I think when we read about demon possessions, it's hard for us to know just what to do with that. It doesn't really connect to our experiences. How do we understand it? Some commentators want to explain it as mental illness, but that seems to me to be an injustice to those who struggle with mental health. Mental illness is still so often misunderstood and often stigmatized. Effective treatment and access to good mental health care providers are often hard to come by. Many of us deal with mental illness, even if we don't talk about it together, either in our own lives or in the lives of people we love. And it can be a terrible burden in the lives who are afflicted by mental illness, as well as in the lives of those who love them. But rarely does mental illness take people to the extreme behaviors of this man we read about in the gospel reading. For the first time in my life, as I grapple with grief, I am seeing a mental health counselor. I've been diagnosed with an adjustment disorder, to which I say, no kidding, because grief doesn't fit any of the insurable categories. It's been extraordinarily helpful, and I'm so grateful for this resource in my healing. We need to work to remove the shame and the stigma that comes from treating and addressing our mental health and well-being. So while demon possession isn't something in the realm of most of our experiences, I do think that all of us know what it means to feel possessed by some kind of destructive force. We know what it is to have our lives taken hold of by something that we don't quite know how to break free of, something that seems to be pulling the life right out of us, something that can make us feel out of control in our lives, something that might be destroying our relationships. Whatever destructive force has taken hold in our lives, it often leads us to circumstances that are not unlike the possessed man in this morning's gospel reading. We may feel alone, cut off from others, like we're on the other side of some glass door, never knowing peace or feeling more dead than alive. These kinds of forces take hold in our hearts and our minds and our spirits. It might be addiction, anger, fear, self-loathing, guilt, shame, or something else, but it takes hold of us and we don't know how to be free. These destructive forces can inflict themselves on us as individuals, but it also seems clear that certain forces also inflict themselves on us as a nation or a society. When Jesus asks the man the name of the demons reply, "Legion, for we are many." Now, for people in the ancient Roman world of Jesus, legion had only one literal meaning. It was a unit of approximately 6,000 Roman soldiers, the occupying army. And so suddenly, exorcism also takes on a social and a political significance. There are so many occupying forces for us as a people, as a nation. Racism, greed, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, all forces that lead us to fear-fueled destructive behaviors that drive us away from each other and often lead to fear, violence, injustice. This last week on Wednesday evening, about a dozen people from United went to see the movie Emmanuel. The movie, a documentary, recounts through family members and friends the stories of 9 members of Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, who were gunned down by a young white man fueled with racism and hate. The group of 9 at the church had welcomed this young man in, and they'd invited him to sit with them during their Bible study, and he'd done that. The young shooter, a self-declared white supremacist, had grown up in Charleston, a city that had once been a port welcoming 40% of the enslaved Africans who entered our nation, a city that still flew flags in 2015 that honored the Confederacy. Now, within that culture, the black church had stood as a place where black people could gather, where they could hear freely God's word of truth and freedom and understand their identity, not as defined by the culture around them that said they were less, but rather by God's word that told them they were beloved people of God. The shooter, he imagined that this act of hate and violence would incite further violence and deepen division among the races. But God had other plans. At the bail hearing, family members of the victims who didn't know they would even be called upon to speak because that's not the way things are usually done, they began to speak words of forgiveness to the shooter, explaining it later as having a power that they could not quite understand or explain take hold of them. Following the shooting, 10,000 or more people, black and white, gathered in a display of unity. They came together in grief, they wept, they prayed, they vowed to work towards something better. Republican Governor Nikki Haley called for a removal of Confederate flags from all public places. Racism continues to thrive in our nation in many forms, but in Charleston, South Carolina, in June of 2015, the Spirit of God empowered people to address the destructive force of racism with God's power of healing, love, and reconciliation. In the gospel text for today, this man who was possessed of a demon, he's healed. And the people who come out to see what's happened, they find him sitting at Jesus' feet. now clothed and in his right mind. And you would think that'd be reason for Thanksgiving, right? Maybe a celebration. But instead, we're told that the members of this community are afraid. And they ask Jesus to leave. Get out of here, Jesus. You see, when Jesus shows up with the power of God's love for freedom and new life, things start to change. And change can be threatening. I think it's all too easy to make peace with the demons that torment us, whatever they are. Racism, addiction, sexism, materialism, self-doubt. But God never intended for this to be our way of life. God imbued us with dignity and worth and purpose and calls us to discover the same thing in others. When Jesus shows up on the shores of our lives and relationships, we might be asked to leave behind our anger in order to take hold of forgiveness, old patterns or friendships in order to work toward recovery, our greed or our prejudices in order to see and honor the value and worth of all people. In a commentary I read this week by David Lowes, he said, "There are so many voices trying to possess and discourage us that we might still call them legion. Yet against all of that stands the still, small, but mighty voice of the one who calls us back to God's love, who calls us back to our right minds and grace-filled identities. Thanks be to God." Jesus comes to challenge and to cast out every power that prevents us from living fully and freely as human beings created in the image of God. In our baptisms into his death and resurrection, all distinctions among us disappear. We are clothed with new life and new identities, people who receive grace upon grace and the identity as beloved children of God. The world around us wants us to listen to other voices, and there are legions of them. And some of us find the voice of Jesus too demanding, too costly. It's easy for all of us to become too comfortable simply with the way things are. But for those whom Jesus has healed and freed, we know that this liberating love is good news. And Jesus calls us to share this good news with words and with actions in the world today, to everyone who feels possessed of some power they're not in control of, to announce to them the good news of all that God has done and continues to do for us. Amen.